May it please the tribunal. When the tribunal rose yesterday afternoon, I had just offered in evidence document 2826 PS, Exhibit USA 111. This was an article by SS group leader Karl Hermann Frank, published in Böhmen und Mähren, Bohemia and Moravia, the official periodical of the Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. The issue of March 1941 at page 79. It is an article which reveals with considerable frankness the functions which the FS and the SS served, and shows the pride which the Nazi conspirators took in the activities of these organizations. I read from that article under the heading, the SS on March 15, 1939. A modern people and a modern state are today unthinkable without political troops. To these are allotted the special task of being the advance guard of the political will and the guarantor of its unity. This is especially true of the German folk groups, which have their home in some other people's state. Accordingly, the Sudeten German Party had formally also organized its political troop, the Voluntary Vigilantes, or in German, Freiwillige Selbstschutz, called FS for short. This troop was trained especially in accordance with the principles of the SS, so far as these could be used in this region at that time. The troop was likewise assigned here the special task of protecting the homeland actively, if necessary. It stood up well in its first test in this connection, wherever in the fall crisis of 1938 it had to assume the protection of the homeland, arms in hand. After the annexation of the Sudeten Gau, the tasks of the FS were transferred essentially to the German student organizations as compact troop formations in Prague and Brünn, aside from the isolated German communities which remained in the Second Republic. This was also natural because many active students from the Sudeten Gau were already members of the SS. The student organizations then had to endure this test in common with other Germans during the crisis of March 1939. In the early morning hours of March 15, after the announcement of the planned entry of German troops in various localities, German men had to act in some localities in order to assure a quiet course of events, either by assumption of the police authority, as for instance in Brünn, or by corresponding instruction of the police president, etc. In some Czech offices, men had likewise, in the early hours of the morning, begun to burn valuable archives and the material of political files. It was also necessary to take measures here in order to prevent foolish destruction. How significant the many-sided and comprehensive measures were considered by the competent German agencies follows from the fact that many of the men, either on March 15 itself or on the following days, were admitted into the SS with fitting acknowledgement, in part even through the Reich's leader of the SS himself, or through SS group leader Heydrich. The activities and deeds of these men were thereby designated as accomplished in the interest of the SS. Immediately after the corresponding divisions of the SS had marched in with the first columns of the German army and had assumed responsibility in the appropriate sectors, the men here placed themselves at once at their further disposition and became valuable auxiliaries and collaborators. I now ask the court to take judicial notice under Article 21 of the Charter of 3 official documents. These are identified by us as documents D571, D572, and 2943 PS. I offer them in evidence respectively D571 as Exhibit USA 112, D572, Exhibit USA 113, and 2943 PS, which is the French official yellow book at pages 66 and 67 as Exhibit US 114. D572 was Exhibit US 113. The first two documents are British diplomatic dispatches, properly certified to by the British government, which give the background of intrigue in Slovakia, German intrigue in Slovakia. The third document, 2943 PS, or Exhibit USA 114, consists of excerpts from the French Yellow Book, principally excerpts from dispatches sent by Monsieur Coulond, the French ambassador in Berlin, to the French Foreign Office between 13 and 18 March 1939. I expect to draw on these three dispatches rather freely in the further course of my presentation, since the tribunal will take judicial notice of each of these documents, I think. And therefore, it may not be necessary to read them at length into the transcript. In Slovakia, the long-anticipated crisis came on 10 March. On that day, the Czechoslovakian government dismissed those members of the Slovak cabinet who refused to continue negotiations with Prague. Among them, Prime Minister Tiso and Durkanzi. Within 24 hours, the Nazis seized upon this act of the Czech government as an excuse for intervention. On the following day, March 11, a strange scene was enacted in Bratislava, the Slovak capital. I quote from document D571, which was US 112. That is the report of the British minister in Prague to the British government. Herr Berkel, Herr Seyss-Inquart, and 5 German generals came at about 10 p.m. in the evening of Saturday, the 11th March, into a cabinet meeting in progress in Bratislava, and told the Slovak government that they should proclaim the independence of Slovakia. When Monsieur Sidor, the Prime Minister, showed hesitation, Herr Berkel took him on one side and explained that Herr Hitler had decided to settle the question of Czechoslovakia definitively. Slovakia ought, therefore, to proclaim her independence because Herr Hitler would otherwise disinterest himself in her fate. Monsieur Sidor thanked Herr Berkel for this information, but said that he must discuss the situation with the government at Prague. A very strange situation, that he should have to discuss such a matter with his own government before obeying the instructions of Herr Hitler, delivered by 5 German generals and Herr Berkel and Herr Seyss-Inquart. Events were now moving rapidly. Durkanski, one of the dismissed ministers, escaped with Nazi assistance to Vienna, where the facilities of the German broadcasting station were placed at his disposal. Arms and ammunition were brought from German offices in Engerau, across the Danube, into Slovakia, where they were used by the FS and the Hlinka Guard to create incidents and disorder of the type required by the Nazis as an excuse for military action. The German press and radio launched a violent campaign against the Czechoslovak government, and significantly, an invitation from Berlin was delivered in Bratislava. Tiso, the dismissed Prime Minister, was summoned by Hitler to an audience in the German capital. A plane was awaiting him in Vienna. At this point, in the second week of March 1939, preparations for what the Nazi leaders liked to call the liquidation of Czechoslovakia were progressing with what to them must have been very satisfying smoothness. The military, diplomatic, and propaganda machinery of the Nazi conspirators was moving in close coordination. As during the process of the Fall Grün, or Case Green, of the preceding summer, the Nazi conspirators had invited Hungary to participate in this new attack. Admiral Horthy, the Hungarian regent, was again greatly flattered by this invitation. I offer in evidence document 2816 PS as Exhibit USA 115. This is a letter the distinguished admiral of Hungary, a country which incidentally had no navy, wrote to Hitler on 13 March 1939, and which we captured in the German Foreign Office files. Your Excellency, my sincere thanks. I can hardly tell you how happy I am, because this headwater region, I dislike using big words, is of vital importance to the life of Hungary. I suppose he needed some headwaters for the non-existent navy, of which he was admiral. In spite of the fact that our recruits have only been serving for 5 weeks, we are going into this affair with eager enthusiasm. The dispositions have already been made. On Thursday, the 16th of this month, a frontier incident will take place, which will be followed by the big blow on Saturday. He doesn't like to use big words. Big blow is sufficient. I shall never forget this proof of friendship, and Your Excellency may rely on my unshakable gratitude at all times. Your devoted friend, Horthy. From this cynical and callous letter from the distinguished admiral.
Was that letter addressed to the Hungarian ambassador at Berlin?
I thought it was addressed to Hitler.
Well, I didn't know what... There's some words at the top which look like a Hungarian name.
That's a letterhead. As I understand it, the letter was addressed to Adolf Hitler.
Oh, I see. What's that?
And I should have said it ended with the...
Is there anything on the letter which indicates that?
Only the fact that it was found in the Berlin Foreign Office. And the wording of the letter and the address, Your Excellency. We may be drawing a conclusion as to whom it was addressed to, but it was found in the Berlin Foreign Office. From that cynical and callous letter, it may be inferred that the Nazi conspirators had already informed the Hungarian government of their plans for further military action against Czechoslovakia. As it turned out, the timetable was advanced somewhat. I would draw the inference that His Excellency Adolf Hitler informed his devoted friend Horthy of this change in good time. On the diplomatic level, the defendant Ribbentrop was quite active. On 13 March, the same day on which Horthy wrote his letter, Ribbentrop sent a cautionary telegram to the German minister in Prague, outlining the course of conduct he should pursue during the coming diplomatic pressure. I offer in evidence document 2815 PS as Exhibit USA 116. This is the telegram sent by Ribbentrop to the German legation in Prague on 13 March. Berlin, 13 March, 1939. Prague, telegram in secret code with reference to telephone instructions given by court today. In case you should get any written communication from President Hasha, please do not make any written or verbal comments or take any other action on them, but pass them on here by cipher telegram. Moreover, I must ask you and the other members of the embassy to make a point of not being available if the Czech government wants to communicate with you during the next few days. Signed, Ribbentrop. On the afternoon of 13 March, Monsignor Tiso, accompanied by Dirkonsky and Karmazin, the local Nazi leader, arrived in Berlin in response to the summons from Hitler, to which I have heretofore referred. Late that afternoon, Tiso was received by Hitler in his study in the Reich Chancellery and presented with an ultimatum. Two alternatives were given him: either declare the independence of Slovakia or be left without German assistance to what were referred to as the mercies of Poland and Hungary. This decision, Hitler said, was not a question of days, but of hours. I now offer in evidence document 2802 PS as Exhibit USA 117. Again, a document captured in the German Foreign Office. German Foreign Office minutes of the meeting between Hitler and Tiso on 13 March. I read the bottom paragraph on page 2 and the top paragraph on page 3 of the English translation. The first paragraph I shall read is a summary of Hitler's remarks. You will note that in the inducements he held out to the Slovaks, Hitler displayed his customary disregard for the truth. I quote, "Now he had permitted Minister Tiso to come here in order to make this question clear in a very short time. Germany had no interests east of the Carpathian Mountains. It was indifferent to him what happened there. The question was whether Slovakia wished to conduct her own affairs or not. He did not wish for anything from Slovakia. He would not pledge his people, or even a single soldier, to something which was not in any way desired by the Slovak people. He would like to secure final confirmation as to what Slovakia really wished. He did not wish that reproaches should come from Hungary that he was preserving something which did not wish to be preserved at all. He took a liberal view of unrest and demonstration in general. But in this connection, unrest was only an outward indication of interior instability. He would not tolerate it. And he had, for that reason, permitted Tiso to come in order to hear his decision. It was not a question of days, but of hours. He had stated at that time that Slovakia wished to make herself independent. He would support this endeavor and even guarantee it. He would stand by his word so long as Slovakia would make it clear that she wished for independence. If she hesitated or did not wish to dissolve the connection with Prague, he would leave the destiny of Slovakia to the mercy of events for which he was no longer responsible. In that case, he would only intercede for German interests, and those did not lie east of the Carpathians. Germany had nothing to do with Slovakia. She had never belonged to Germany. The Führer asked the Reich Foreign Minister, the Defendant Ribbentrop, if he had any remarks to add. The Reich Foreign Minister also emphasized for his part the conception that in this case a decision was a question of hours, not of days. He showed the Führer a message he had just received which reported Hungarian troop movements on the Slovak frontiers. The Führer read this report, mentioned it to Tiso, and expressed the hope that Slovakia would soon decide clearly for herself. A most extraordinary interview. Germany had no interest in Slovakia. Slovakia had never belonged to Germany. Tiso was invited there. And this is what happened. Those present at that meeting included the Defendant Ribbentrop, the Defendant Keitel, State Secretary Dietrich, State Secretary Kepler, and German Minister of State Meissner. I invite the attention of the tribunal to the presence of the Defendant Keitel on this occasion, as on so many other occasions where purely political measures in furtherance of Nazi aggression were under discussion, and where apparently there was no need for technical military advice. While in Berlin, the Slovaks also conferred separately with the Defendant Ribbentrop and with other high Nazi officials. Ribbentrop very solicitously handed Tito a copy already drafted in Slovak language of the law proclaiming the independence of Slovakia. On the night of the 13th, a German plane was conveniently placed at Tiso's disposal to carry him home. On 14 March, pursuant to the wishes of the Nazi conspirators, the Diet of Bratislava proclaimed the independence of Slovakia. With Slovak extremists acting at the Nazi bidding, in open revolt against the Czechoslovak government, the Nazi leaders were now in a position to move against Prague. On the evening of the 14th, at the suggestion of the German legation in Prague, Monsieur Hacha, the President of the Czechoslovak Republic, and Monsieur Schwalkowski, his foreign minister, arrived in Berlin. The atmosphere in which they found themselves might be described as somewhat hostile. Since the preceding weekend, the Nazi press had accused the Czechs of using violence against the Slovaks, and especially against the members of the German minority and citizens of the Reich. Both press and radio proclaimed that the lives of Germans were in danger, that the situation was intolerable, and that it was necessary to smother as quickly as possible the focus of trouble which Prague had become in the heart of Europe, these peacemakers. After midnight on the 15th, at 1:15 in the morning, Hacha and Schwalkowski were ushered into the Reich Chancellery. They found there Adolf Hitler, the defendants Ribbentrop, Gerring, and Keitel, and other high Nazi officials. I now offer in evidence document 2798 PS as Exhibit USA 118, this document is the captured German Foreign Office account of this infamous meeting. It is a long document. Parts of it are so revealing and give so clear a picture of Nazi behavior and tactics that I shall read them in full. It must be remembered that this account of the fateful conference of the night of March 14-15 comes from German sources. And of course it must be read as an account biased by its source, or as counsel for the defendants said last week, a tendentious account. Nevertheless, even without too much discounting of the report on account of its source, it constitutes a complete condemnation of the Nazis, who by pure and simple international banditry forced the dissolution of Czechoslovakia. And I interpolate to suggest that international banditry has been a crime against international law for centuries. I'll first read the headings to the minutes. In the English mimeograph version in the document books, the time given is an incorrect translation of the original. It should read 01:15 to 02:15. Conversation between the Führer and Reich Chancellor and the President of Czechoslovakia, Hácha, in the presence of the Reich Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop and of the Czechoslovakian Foreign Minister, Schwelkowski, in the Reich Chancellery on 15 March 1939, 01:15 to 02:15 hours. Others present were General Field Marshal Gerring, General Keitel, Secretary of the State von Weizsäcker, Minister of the State Meissner, Secretary of the State Dietrich, Counselor of the Legation Huell. Hácha opened the conference. He was conciliatory, even humble, though the president of a sovereign state. He thanked Hitler for receiving him, and he said he knew that the fate of Czechoslovakia rested in the Führer's hands. Hitler replied that he regretted that he had been forced to ask Hácha to come to Berlin, particularly because of the great age of the president. Hácha was then, I believe, in his 70s. But this journey, Hitler told the president, could be of great advantage to his country because, and I quote, it was only a matter of hours until Germany would intervene. I quote now from the top of page 3 of the English translation. Now you will bear in mind that what I am reading are rough notes or minutes of what Adolf Hitler said. Czechoslovakia was a matter of indifference to him. If Czechoslovakia had kept closer to Germany, it would have been an obligation to Germany. But he was glad that he did not have this obligation now. He had no interests whatsoever in the territory east of the Little Carpathian Mountains. He did not want to draw the final consequences in the autumn.
Mr. Alderman, don't you think you ought to read the last sentence on page 2?
So, yes. The last sentence from the preceding page was, for the other countries, Czechoslovakia was nothing but a means to an end. London and Paris were not in a position to really stand up for Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was a matter of indifference to him. Now then I had read down to, but even at that time, and also later in his conversations with Schwelkowski, he made it clear that he would ruthlessly smash this state if Beneš's tendencies were not completely revised. Schwelkowski understood this and asked the Führer to have patience. He often bragged of his patience. The Führer saw this point of view, but the months went by without any change. The new regime did not succeed in eliminating the old one psychologically. He observed this from the press. Mouth-to-mouth propaganda, dismissals of Germans, and many other things which to him were a symbol of the total positive. Sounds like a Kantian expression to me. At first he had not understood this, but when it became clear to him, he drew his consequences, because had the development continued in this way, the relations with Czechoslovakia would in a few years have become the same as 6 months ago. Why did Czechoslovakia not immediately reduce its army to a reasonable size? Such an army was a tremendous burden for such a state, because it only makes sense if it supports the foreign political mission of the state. Since Czechoslovakia no longer has a foreign political mission, such an army is meaningless. He enumerates several examples which prove to him that the spirit in the army had not changed. This symptom convinced him that the army also would be a source of a severe political burden in the future. Added to this were the inevitable development of economic necessities, and further, the protests from national groups which could no longer endure life as it was. I interpolate, if the tribunal please, to notice the significance of that language of Adolf Hitler to the president of a supposed sovereign state and its prime minister, having in his presence General Field Marshal Gerring, the commander of the Air Force, and General Keitel. And continuing the quote, thus it is, I think it must have been, that the die was cast on the past Sunday. This is still Adolf Hitler talking. I sent for the Hungarian ambassador and told him that I am withdrawing my hands from this country. We were now confronted with this fact. He had given the order to the German troops to march into Czechoslovakia and to incorporate Czechoslovakia into the German Reich. He wanted to give Czechoslovakia fullest autonomy and a life of her own to a larger extent than she ever had enjoyed during Austrian rule. Germany's attitude towards Czechoslovakia will be determined tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and depends on the attitude of the Czechoslovakian people and the Czechoslovakian military toward the German troops. He no longer trusts the government. He believes in the honesty and straightforwardness of Hasha and Shvalkovsky, but doubts that the government will be able to assert itself in the entire nation. The German army had already started out today, and at one barracks where resistance was offered, it was ruthlessly broken. Another barracks had given in at the deployment of heavy artillery. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the German army would invade Czechoslovakia from all sides, and the German Air Force would occupy the Czech airfields. There existed two possibilities. The first one would be that the invasion of the German troops would lead to a battle. In this case, the resistance will be broken by all means with physical force. The other possibility is that the invasion of the German troops occurs in bearable form, insupportable. In that case, it would be easy for the Führer to give Czechoslovakia, at the new organization of Czech life, a generous life of her own, autonomy, and a certain national liberty. We witnessed at the moment a great historical turning point. He would not like to torture and denationalize the Czechs. He also did not do all that because of hatred, but in order to protect Germany. If Czechoslovakia in the fall of last year would not have yielded, I suppose that's a bad translation for had not yielded, the Czech people would have been exterminated. Nobody could have prevented him from doing that. It was his will that the Czech people should live a full national life. And he believed firmly that a way could be found which would make far-reaching concessions to the Czech desires. If fighting would break out tomorrow, the pressure would result in counter-pressure. One would annihilate one another, and it would then not be possible anymore for him to give the promised alleviation. Within 2 days, the Czech army would not exist anymore. Of course, Germans would also be killed, and this would result in a hatred which would force him, that's Hitler, because of his instinct of self-preservation, not to grant autonomy anymore. The world would not move a muscle. He felt pity for the Czech people when he was reading the foreign press. I should think he would have. It would leave the impression on him, which could be summarized in a German proverb: the Moor has done his duty, the Moor may go. That was the state of affairs. There existed two trends in Germany. A harder one, which did not want any concessions, and wished in memory to the past that Czechoslovakia would be conquered with blood. And another one, the attitude of which corresponded with his just mentioned suggestions. That was the reason why he had asked Haisha to come here. This invitation was the last good deed which he could offer to the Czech people. If it would come to a fight, the bloodshed would also force us to hate. But the visit of Haisha could perhaps prevent the extreme. Perhaps it would contribute to finding a form of construction which would be so far-reaching for Czechoslovakia as she could never have hoped for in the old Austria. His aim was only to create the necessary security for the German people. The hours went past. He'd already told old Haisha that it was a matter of hours, not of days. The hours went past. At 6 o'clock, the troops would march in. He was almost ashamed to say that there was one German division to each Czech battalion. The military action was no small one, but planned with all generosity. He would advise him, that is, Adolf Hitler advising poor old Hacha, now to retire with Schwalkowski in order to discuss what should be done. In his reply to this long harangue, Hacha, according to the German minutes, said that he agreed that resistance would be useless. He expressed doubt that he would be able to issue the necessary orders to the Czech army in the 4 hours left to him before the German army crossed the Czech border. He asked if the object of the invasion was to disarm the Czech army. If so, he indicated that might possibly be arranged. Hitler replied that his decision was final, that it was well known what a decision of the Fuhrer meant. He turned to the circle of Nazi conspirators surrounding him for their support. And you will remember that the defendants Gerring, Ribbentrop, and Keitel were all present. The only possibility of disarming the Czech army, Hitler said, was by the intervention of the German army. I read now one paragraph from page 4 of the English version of these German minutes of this infamous meeting. It's the next to the last paragraph on page 4. The Fuhrer states that his decision was irrevocable. It was well known what a decision of the Fuhrer meant. He did not see any other possibility for disarmament and asked the other gentlemen, that's including Goering, Ribbentrop, and Keitel, whether they shared his opinion, which was answered in the affirmative. The only possibility to disarm the Czech army was by the German army. At this sad point, Hacha and Schwalkowski retired from the room. I now offer in evidence document 2861 PS, an excerpt from the official British Blue Book, the British War Blue Book. At page 14, and I offer it as Exhibit USA 119. This is an official document of the British government of which the tribunal will take judicial notice under the provisions of Article 21 of the Charter. The point to which I called attention, I'm sorry, I said page 14, it should be page 24. The part from which I read is a dispatch from the British ambassador, Sir Neville Henderson, describing a conversation with the defendant Gerring, in which the events of this early morning meeting are set forth. Sir Neville Henderson to Viscount Halifax. Berlin, May 28, 1939. My Lord, I paid a short visit to Field Marshal Gerring at Guerin Hall yesterday. Then I skipped 2 paragraphs and began reading with paragraph 4. I'm sorry, I think I'd better read all of those paragraphs. Field Marshal Gerring, who had obviously just been talking to someone else on the subject, began by inveighing against the attitude which was being adopted in England toward everything German, and particularly in respect of the gold held there on behalf of the National Bank of Czechoslovakia. Before, however, I had time to reply, he was called to the telephone, and on his return did not revert to this specific question. He complained instead of British hostility in general, of our political and economic encirclement of Germany, and the activities of what he described as the war party in England, etc. I told the Field Marshal that before speaking of British hostility, he must understand why the undoubted change of feeling towards Germany in England had taken place. As he knew quite well, the basis of all the discussions between Mr. Chamberlain and Herr Hitler last year had been to the effect that once the Sudeten were allowed to enter the Reich, Germany would leave the Czechs alone and would do nothing to interfere with their independence. Herr Hitler had given a definite assurance to that effect in his letter to the Prime Minister of the 27th September. By yielding to the advice of his, quote, wild men, end the quote, and deliberately annexing Bohemia and Moravia, Herr Hitler had not only broken his word to Mr. Chamberlain, but had infringed the whole principle of self-determination on which the Munich Agreement rested. At this point, the Field Marshal interrupted me with a description of President Hacha's visit to Berlin. I told Field Marshal Gerring that it was not possible to talk of free will when I understood that he himself had threatened to bombard Prague with his airplanes if Dr. Hacha refused to sign. The Field Marshal did not deny the fact, but explained how the point had arisen. According to him, Dr. Hacha had from the first been prepared to sign everything, but had said that constitutionally he could not do so without reference first to Prague. After considerable difficulty, telephonic communication with Prague was obtained, and the Czech government had agreed, while adding that they could not guarantee that one Czech battalion at least would not fire on German troops. It was, he said, only at that stage that he had warned Dr. Hacha that if German lives were lost, he would bombard Prague. The Field Marshal also repeated in reply to some comment of mine, the story that the advance occupation of Vitskowitz had been effected solely in order to forestall the Poles, who, he said, were known to have the intention of seizing this valuable area at the first opportunity. I also invite the attention of the tribunal and the judicial notice of the tribunal to dispatch number 77 in the French official Yellow Book. At page 7 of the book identified as our document 2943 PS, appearing in the document book under that number, and I ask that it be given identifying number Exhibit USA 114. This is a dispatch from Monsieur Coulondre, the French ambassador, and it gives another well-informed version of this same midnight meeting. The account which I shall present to the court of the remainder of this meeting is drawn from these two sources, the British Blue Book and the French Yellow Book. I think the court may be interested to read somewhat further at large in those two books, which furnish a great deal of the background of all of these matters. When President Hacha left the conference room in the Reich Chancellery, he was in such a state of exhaustion that he needed medical attention from a physician who was conveniently on hand for that purpose, a German physician. When the two Czechs returned to the room, the Nazi conspirators again told them of the power and invincibility of the Wehrmacht. They reminded them that in 3 hours at 6 in the morning...
Reading on? Not reading yet. Oh, you're not reading, I beg your pardon.
I'm not reading, I'm summarizing from these books.
Go on.
They reminded him that in 3 hours at 6 in the morning, the German army would cross the border. The defendant Gerring boasted of what the German Wehrmacht would do if the Czech forces dared to resist the invading Germans. If German lives were lost, Defendant Gerring said, his Luftwaffe would blast half of Prague into ruins in 2 hours. And that, Gerring said, would be only the beginning. Under this threat of imminent and merciless attack by land and air, the aged president of Czechoslovakia, at 4:30 in the morning, signed the document with which the Nazi conspirators confronted him and which they already had prepared. This document is TC 49, the Declaration of 15 March 1939, one of the series of documents which will be presented by the British prosecutor. And from it I quote this, on the assumption it will subsequently be introduced. The President of the Czechoslovak state entrusts with entire confidence the destiny of the Czech people and the Czech country to the hands of the Führer of the German Reich. Really, a rendezvous with destiny. While the Nazi officials were threatening and intimidating the representatives of the Czech government, the Wehrmacht had in some areas already crossed the Czech border. I offer in evidence document 2860 PS, another excerpt from the British Blue Book, of which I ask the court to take judicial notice. This is a speech by Lord Halifax, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, from which I quote one passage. That's document 2860 PS, which I've already offered and had identified. It is to be observed, and the fact is surely not without significance, that the towns of Marish Ostrai and Vitkovice were actually occupied by German SS detachments on the evening of the 14th March, while the President and the Foreign Minister of Czechoslovakia were still on their way to Berlin and before any discussion had taken place. At dawn on March 15, German troops poured into Czechoslovakia from all sides. Hitler issued an order of the day to the armed forces and a proclamation to the German people which stated succinctly, Czechoslovakia has ceased to exist. On the following day, in direct contravention of Article 81 of the Treaty of Versailles, Czechoslovakia was formally incorporated into the German Reich under the name of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. This decree is document TC 51, another of the documents which the British delegation will present to the tribunal later in this week. It was signed in Prague on 16 March 1939 by Hitler, Lammers, and the defendants Frick and von Ribbentrop. I should like to quote the first sentence of this decree. The Bohemian Moravian countries belonged for a millennium to the Lebensraum, or living space, of the German people. The remainder of the decree sets forth in bleak detail the extent to which Czechoslovakia henceforth was to be subjected to Germany. A German protector was to be appointed by the Führer for the so-called protectorate. The defendant von Neurath. God deliver us from such protectors. The German government assumed charge of their foreign affairs and of their customs and of their excises. It was specified that German garrisons and military establishments would be maintained in the protectorate. At the same time, the extremist leaders in Slovakia, who at German Nazi insistence had done so much to undermine the Czech state, found that the independence of their weak old state was itself, in fact, qualified. I offer in evidence document 1439 PS as Exhibit USA. Oh, I need not offer that. I think it's a decree in the Reichsgesetzblatt, of which I ask the tribunal to take judicial notice, and it's identified as our document 1439 PS. It appears at page 606, 1939 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 2, It's the covering declaration is signed by the defendant von Ribbentrop, Reich Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then there's the heading, Treaty of Protection, to be extended by the German Reich to the state of Slovakia. The German government and the Slovak government have agreed, after the Slovak state has placed itself under the protection of the German Reich, to regulate by treaty the consequences resulting from this fact. For this purpose, the undersigned representatives of the two governments have agreed on the following provisions. Article 1. The German Reich undertakes to protect the political independence of the state of Slovakia and the integrity of its territory. Article 2. For the purpose of making effective the protection undertaken by the German Reich, the German armed forces shall have the right at all times to construct military installations and to keep them garrisoned in the strength they deem necessary in an area delimited on its western side by the frontiers of the state of Slovakia and on its eastern side by a line formed by the eastern rims of the Lower Carpathians, the White Carpathians, and the Javornik Mountains. That's something for me. And then I skip. The government of Slovakia will organize its military forces in close agreement with the German armed forces. I also offer in evidence document 2793 PS.
Would that be a convenient time to break off?
Yes.
I understand that it would be for the convenience of Defendant's counsel if the tribunal adjourned for an hour and a quarter rather than for an hour at midday. And accordingly, the tribunal will rise at 12:45.
May it please the tribunal. This secret protocol, a secret protocol between Germany and Slovakia, provided for close economic and financial collaboration between Germany and Czechoslovakia. Mineral resources and subsoil rights were placed at the disposal of the German government. I offer in evidence document 2793 PS, Exhibit USA 120. And from it I read paragraph 3. Investigation, development, and utilization of the Slovak natural resources. In this respect, the basic principle is that insofar as they are not needed to meet Slovakia's own requirements, they should be placed in first line at Germany's disposal. The entire soil research, Bodenforschung, the German word, will be placed under the Reich Agency for Soil Research. That's the Reichsstelle für Bodenforschung. The government of the Slovak state will soon start an investigation to determine whether the present owners of concessions and privileges have fulfilled the industrial obligations prescribed by law. And it will cancel concessions and privileges in cases where these duties have been neglected. In their private conversations, the Nazi conspirators gave abundant evidence that they considered Slovakia a mere puppet state, in effect a German possession. I offer in evidence document R100 as Exhibit USA 121. This document is a memorandum of information given by Hitler to General von Brauchitsch on 25 March 1939. Much of it deals with problems arising from recently occupied Bohemia and Moravia and Slovakia. I quote beginning at the 6th paragraph. Colonel General Keitel shall inform Slovak government via Foreign Office that it would not be allowed to keep or garrison armed Slovak units, Hlinka Guards, on this side of the border formed by the river Vag. They shall be transferred to the new Slovak territory. Hlinka Guards should be disarmed. Slovak shall be requested via Foreign Office to deliver to us against payment any arms we want and which are still kept in Slovakia. This request is to be based upon agreement made between Army and Czech troops. For this payment, these millions should be used, which we will pour anyhow into Slovakia. Czech Protectorate. HGR. The translator's note indicates that that probably means Army Group. Army Groups, I can't vouch for it. Shall be asked again whether the request shall be repeated again for the delivery of all arms within a stated time limit and under the threat of severe penalties. We take all war material of former Czechoslovakia without paying for it. The guns bought by contract before 15 February, though, shall be paid for. Bohemia, Moravia have to make annual contributions to the German treasury. Their amounts shall be fixed on the basis of the expenses earmarked formally for the Czech army. The German conquest of Czechoslovakia, in direct contravention of the Munich Agreement, was the occasion for formal protests by the British and French governments. These documents, numbers TC-52 and TC-53, dated 17 March 1939, will be presented to the tribunal by the British prosecutor. On the same day, 17 March 1939, the acting Secretary of State of the United States government issued a statement. I offer in evidence, and I also invite the court to take judicial notice of the entire volume, document 2862 PS as Exhibit USA 122, which is an excerpt from the official volume entitled Peace and War, United States Foreign Policy, 1931 to 1941, issued under the seal of the Department of State of the United States of America. Incidentally, this volume, which happens to be my own copy, and I hope I can get another one, I'm lodging in evidence because I'm quite certain that in its study of the background of this whole case, the court will be very much interested in this volume, which is a detailed chronological history of all of the diplomatic events leading up to and through the Second World War in 1941. What I'm actually offering in evidence at the moment appears on pages 454 and 455 of the volume. Statement by the Acting Secretary of State Wells, March 17, 1939. The government of the United States has on frequent occasions stated its conviction that only through international support of a program of order based upon law can world peace be assured. This government, founded upon and dedicated to the principles of human liberty and of democracy, cannot refrain from making known this country's condemnation of the acts which have resulted in the temporary extinguishment of the liberties of a free and independent people, with whom, from the day when the Republic of Czechoslovakia attained its independence, the people of the United States have maintained specially close and friendly relations. The position of the government of the United States has been made consistently clear. It has emphasized the need for respect for the sanctity of treaties and of the pledged word, and for non-intervention by any nation in the domestic affairs of other nations. And it has on repeated occasions expressed its condemnation of a policy of military aggression. It is manifest that acts of wanton lawlessness and of arbitrary force are threatening world peace and the very structure of modern civilization. The imperative need for the observance of the principles advocated by this government has been clearly demonstrated by the developments which have taken place during the past 3 days. With Czechoslovakia in German hands, the Nazi conspirators had accomplished the program they had set themselves in the meeting in Berlin on 5 November 1937. You will recall that this program of conquest was intended to shorten their frontiers, to increase their industrial and food reserves, and to place them in a position, both industrially and strategically, from which they could launch more ambitious and more devastating campaigns of aggression. In less than a year and a half, this program had been carried through to the satisfaction of the Nazi leaders. And at that point, I would again invite the court's attention to the large chart on the wall. And I think it is no mere figure of speech to make reference to the wolf's head, what's known to Anglo and American law as caput lupinum. The lower jaw formed when Austria was taken, the red part on the first chart, 12 March 1938. Czechoslovakia thereby encircled. The next step, the absorption of the mountainous part, the Sudetenland, indicated on the second chart in red. 1 October 1938, Czechoslovakia further encircled and its defenses weakened. Then the jaws clamp in, or the pincers, as I believe General Keitel or General Jodl called them. I believe it was General Jodl's diary. And you see what they do to Czechoslovakia. 15 March 1939, the borders shortened, new bases acquired. Then Czechoslovakia destroyed Bohemia and Moravia in black, Slovakia in what might be called light tan, but I've read you the documents which showed in what condition Slovakia was left. And with the German military installations in Slovakia, you see how completely the southern border of Poland was flanked, as well as the western border, the stage being set for the next aggression, which the British prosecutor will describe to you. Of all the Nazi conspirators, perhaps the defendant Gerring was the most aware of the economic and strategic advantages which would accrue from the possession by Germany of Czechoslovakia. I now offer in evidence document 1301 PS, which is a rather large file, and I offer particularly item 10 of the document. At page 25 of the English translation, I offer it as Exhibit USA 123. Page 25 of the English translation contain the top secret minutes of a conference with Gerring in the Luftwaffe ministry, the air ministry. The meeting, which was held on 14 October 1938, just 2 weeks after the occupation of the Sudetenland, was devoted to the discussion of economic problems. As of that date, the defendant Gering's remarks were somewhat prophetic. I quote from the third paragraph from the bottom of page 26 of the English translation. The Sudetenland has to be exploited with all the means. General Field Marshal Gerring counts upon a complete industrial assimilation of the Slovakia. Czech and Slovakia would become German dominions. Everything possible must be taken out. The Oder-Danube Canal has to be speeded up. Searches for oil and ore have to be conducted in Slovakia, notably by State Secretary Kepler. In the summer of 1939, after the incorporation of Bohemia and Moravia into the German Reich, Defendant Gerring again revealed the great interest of the Nazi leaders in the Czechoslovak economic potential. I offer in evidence document R-133 as Exhibit USA 124. This document is a minute dated Berlin.
133, isn't it?
Yes, yes, R-133. Dated Berlin, 27 July 1939, signed by Müller, of a conference between Guerin and a group of officials from the OKW and from other agencies of the German government concerned with war production. This meeting had been held 2 days previously on 25 July. I read the first paragraph of the account of this meeting. In a rather long statement, the Field Marshal explained that the incorporation of Bohemia and Moravia into the German economy had taken place, among other reasons, to increase the German war potential by exploitation of the industry there. Letters such as the decree of the Reich Minister for Economics, S-10-402-39 of 10 July 39, as well as a letter with similar meaning to the Junkers firm, which might possibly lower the kind and extent of the armament measures in the Protectorate, are contrary to this principle. If it is necessary to issue such directives, this should be done only with his consent. In any case, he insists, that is, the defendant Gerring insists, in agreement with the directive by Hitler, that the war potential of the Protectorate is definitely to be exploited in part or in full, and is to be directed towards mobilization as soon as possible. In addition to strengthening the Nazi economic potential for further wars of aggression, the conquest of Czechoslovakia provided the Nazis with new bases from which to wage their next war of aggression, the attack on Poland. You will recall the minutes of the conference between Gerring and a pro-Nazi Slovak delegation in the winter of 1938-39. Those minutes are document 2801 PS, which I introduced into evidence earlier as Exhibit USA 109. You will recall the last sentence of those minutes, a statement of Defendant Gerring's conclusions. I quote this sentence again. Air bases in Slovakia are of great importance for the German Air Force for use against the East. I now offer in evidence document 1874 PS as Exhibit USA 125. This document is the German minutes of a conference between Defendant Gerring and Mussolini and Ciano on 15 April 1939, 1 month after the conquest of Czechoslovakia. In this conference, Gerring told his junior partners in the Axis of the progress of German preparations for war. He compared the strength of Germany with the strength of England and France. Not unnaturally, he mentioned the German occupation of Czechoslovakia in this connection. I read 2 paragraphs of these notes. However, that's on page 4, paragraph 2 of the German minutes.
Which document is this?
It's 1874 PS.
Thank you.
However, the heavy armament of Czechoslovakia shows, in any case, how dangerous this company could have been, even after Munich, in the event of a serious conflict. Because of Germany's action, the situation of both Axis countries was ameliorated. Among other reasons, because of the economic possibilities which result from the transfer to Germany of the great production capacity of Czechoslovakia. That contributes toward a considerable strengthening of the Axis against the Western powers. Furthermore, Germany now need not keep ready a single division for protection against that country in case of bigger conflict. This, too, is an advantage by which both Axis countries will, in the last analysis, benefit. And then page 5, paragraph 2 of the German version. The action taken by Germany in Czechoslovakia is to be viewed as an advantage for the Axis in case Poland should finally join the enemies of the Axis powers. Germany could then attack this country from 2 flanks and would be within only 25 minutes flying distance from the new Polish industrial center, which had been moved further into the interior of the country, nearer to the other Polish industrial districts because of its proximity to the border. Now, by the turn of events, it is located again in the proximity of the border. And that flanking on 2 fronts is illustrated on the 4th segment of the chart. I think the chart itself demonstrates better than any oral argument the logic, the cold calculation, the deliberation of each step to this point of the German aggression. More than that, it demonstrates what I might call the master fact of the aggressive war case. That is, that each conquest of the Nazi conspirators was deliberately planned as a stepping stone to new and more ambitious aggression. You will recall the words of Hitler in the conference in the Reich Chancellery on 23 May 1939 when he was planning the Polish campaign. Document L79, exhibit number USA 27. I quote again from it, "The period which lies behind us has indeed been put to good use. All measures have been taken in the correct sequence and in harmony with our aims. It is appropriate to refer to two other speeches of the Nazi leaders. In his lecture at Munich on 7 November 1943, the defendant Jodl spoke as follows, and I quote from page 5 of document L-172, already in evidence as Exhibit USA number 34. On page 8 of the German text. The bloodless solution of the Czech conflict in the autumn of 1938 and spring of 1939, and the annexation of Slovakia rounded off the territory of Greater Germany in such a way that it now became possible to consider the Polish problem on the basis of more or less favorable strategic premises. In the speech to his military commanders on 23 November 1939, Hitler described the process by which he had rebuilt the military power of the Reich. That is our document 789 PS, Exhibit USA 23. I quote one passage from the second paragraph. The next step was Bohemia, Moravia, and Poland. This step also was not possible to accomplish in one campaign. First of all, the western fortification had to be finished. It was not possible to reach the goal in one effort. It was clear to me from the first moment that I could not be satisfied with the Sudeten German territory. That was only a partial solution. The decision to march into Bohemia was made. Then followed the erection of the Protectorate, and with that, the basis for the action against Poland was laid. Before I leave the subject of the aggression against Czechoslovakia, I should like to submit to the court a document which became available to us too late to be included in our document books. It reached me Saturday late in the afternoon or late at night. This is an official document, again, from the Czechoslovakian government, a supplement to the Czechoslovakian report which I have previously offered in evidence. I now offer it identified as exhibit, as document number 3061 PS, as exhibit USA 126. The document was furnished us, if the court please, in German text, with an English translation which didn't seem to us quite adequate, and we have had it retranslated into English. And the translation has just been passed up, I believe, to the tribunal. That mimeographed English translation should be appended to our document book O. I shall not read the report. It's about 12 pages long. The court will take judicial notice of it under the provision of the charter. I merely summarize. This document gives confirmation and corroboration to the other evidence which I have presented to the tribunal. In particular, it offers support to the following allegations. First, the close working relationship between Henlein and the SDP on the one hand, and Hitler and defendants Hess and Ribbentrop on the other. Second, the use of the German legation in Prague to direct the German Fifth Column activity. Third, the financing of the Henlein movement by agencies of the German government, including the German diplomatic representative at Prague. Fourth, the use of the Henlein movement to conduct espionage on direct orders from the Reich. In addition, this document gives further details of the circumstances of the visit of President Hacha to Berlin on the night of 14 March. It substantiates the fact that President Hacha required the medical attention of Hitler's physician, and it supports the threats which the defendant Gerring made to the Czech delegation. And now, if it please the tribunal, that concludes my presentation of what, to me, has always seemed one of the saddest chapters in human history: the rape and destruction of the brave little nation of Czechoslovakia.